Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to go out of my way to talk about Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. I'm going to let you know exactly where to go and watch this show for absolutely free. Ultimately, if you have IMDb TV, you can ultimately see this probably entire series for absolutely free with ads. Ultimately, you can go into IMDb TV and watch this show for absolutely free with ads. Ultimately, if you want to know how exactly this show goes, in a very cryptic like sense, and then I'm going to give you a double 5 time count and then break it down for you in spoiler terms. Ultimately, if you want to just hear what I have to say regardless, maybe because you have zero interest in this show, maybe you watched it when it first came out and you want to hear my thoughts about it, this and that and whatever, what have you. So, my cryptic feelings about this show, my deep down feelings. So, overall, I would say there were some like bizarre cosmetic choices for me in this show. There's sometimes when people would wear a certain kind of clothing, and I'm like, ugh, but other than that, I also like thought that there was very much like a misnomer. There was just kind of like there's a missing kind of piece of this whole thing, and that's what usually gets slapped on the title of the show per every episode. This thing is called the Sarah Connor Chronicles. And ultimately, I do not feel realistically like this show is actually about Sarah Connor. I barely feel it's about a show about John Connor. I feel like it's mostly a show to showcase Summer Glau, Cameron, the female Terminator in this show. Like, I feel like she is the driving force to get this show to be a watchable thing, which is sad. That reasonably the person that is slapped in the title of this thing does not matter to me. The John Connor does not matter to me, and I've invested with these characters for numerous movies, numerous stuff, just all kinds of video games and movies and Terminator, whatever the heck, other things. When going into this, you can only invest in Cameron. And that's where I was just kind of like, okay, that does not make sense. Like, I guess it's kind of like the begrudging thing that you're only going to find the Terminator fascinating, and then everything else is just going to kind of mostly be just kind of background noise for a lot of the time. So, and plus, Summer tends to technically be barely clothed throughout some of this very first season as well. So it's just basically like, okay, well, you get to kind of see a freaking just girl that basically is wearing next to nothing until, like, basically, like, she has to be reminded to wear clothes, which is ridiculous. But, anyways, so I would go out of my way to say that this is a very like a thumbs up kind of show. Like, I wouldn't stretch that this is like a great show. Like, I would just say it's just like barely over the crevice of keeping you interested per every episode. Like, it just kind of barely, like, this Terminator show could have been way worse. So we really, I guess, have to appreciate the fact that they really did what they did in this show, because, like I said, this show could have been a lot cheaper. It could have been a lot just reasonably, like, we could have never seen any kind of reference for a bulk of the Terminator things and this and that. There were some times where I would always have to question certain people's reactions to certain situations. Like, especially when it gets down to a Terminator uh, in a tub, that whole episode, I was just like, huh? Like, this guy is reacting this way? Okay, doke. So, there's a lot of times where there's like, ooh, Terminator, and I'm just like, dude, this guy is here to kill some people and this and that. But anyways, probably the best part about this entire show is really just the action scenes. Basically, everything else seems non-existent or non-important until you finally get to those action scenes, where, of course, Summer's character is going up against a guy that is usually normally twice her size, and she has to freaking fight her way against this guy. And I was like, good God, Summer. I'm like, man, is she just getting freaking thrown around and manhandled, woman handled, whatever you want to call that. She's freaking getting like, she's having to deck these guys that are twice her freaking size. To where, like, towards the end of the season, I'm like, oh, thank God they kind of got away with her, like, kind of having some different kind of story or different kind of thing going on in this show where she's not freaking getting flung around or she's trying to supposedly fling some guy around in this show. I'm like, good God, hopefully she didn't get freaking hurt while doing this show. Um, Hopefully not. Good grief. Anyways, but I'm sure they probably were doing this stuff for like months before the show even started. So it's just like, oh yeah, you're gonna be the female Terminator, Cameron. Yeah, that's what I thought was funny. James Cameron is the co-creator of the Terminator, so I guess they had to throw him a bone to ultimately say, yeah, we're gonna name the new Terminator. Yeah, we're gonna name him after you. But like I said, he's the co-creator of the Terminator, so I'm wondering if the other, I believe, writer of the whole Terminator thing, her name was in there somewhere. But yeah, so John Connor is like basically just a guy that is most of the time just standing around, just saying, "Yeah, I'm John Connor, the leader of the Resistance. Yay! What a life I lead." Yeah, he basically just stands around a lot for most of the season and rarely ever does anything. Um, Sarah Connor is just, that mom character that has to kind of guide her son and tell him things and remind him about things. And then eventually she kind of gets like a little bit of a backstory if you don't remember the films. For people who are probably asking, does this show tie in the films? They do, but it's like for one whole episode, they tie in a movie into this show. And when looking at that, I was just like, God, that is so goofy. It's like they had to dedicate an entire show to the previous films. And I was like, wow, that just feels like a boatload of wow. That kind of felt kind of dumb to me. I was like, well, I guess what were they waiting for this show to really be a hit success? And they were like, okay, well, the second half, now we're gonna bring in the movies because people like this show. Like, if it would have got canceled, then we wouldn't have. No, 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 no. But Shaw and all that, we weren't gonna reference the movies. Oh no, we're gonna make this a separate entity. At first, we were going to call it the Sarah Connor Chronicles, so that way there'd be no tie to the Terminator. But it doesn't make any sense to call this the Sarah Connor Chronicles, because ultimately, it doesn't really tie into Sarah Connor enough in this show. It doesn't even, they could have called it the Connor Chronicles, and maybe that would have made a sliver of more sense. But realistically, the Connors don't really do anything in this show. A lot of the times they're just characters to just stand around a lot of the times for a bulk of the show. Or just read off. Like, it doesn't even seem like John Connor really has much lines to learn throughout this entire show. If you really watch John Connor and really just, you could probably count the number of lines that he probably has throughout this entire season. Or at least half of the season, he probably has maybe a couple lines, maybe a few lines that you can maybe count on one hand, maybe, probably less than that, probably none whatsoever. Like, it seems like if he does have lines, they're extremely easy or brief to say. A lot of the times, like, yeah, you can probably, a bulk of the time, count how many, you can count off John Connor's lines because he really doesn't have any. Really doesn't have much of any to say. He's just a fixture. Hopefully, in season 2, he was much more vitally used because, yeah. Anyways, going into this show, though, I thought that this show was really smart. I really thought that there was a lot of easy ways that they wrote in a lot of stuff to just conveniently made things exciting and stuff like that. There was a lot of times where I was like, why isn't that none of the movies like were this smart about doing their things, but this show was? Like, there was a lot of times where I was just like, wow, they really thought in depth about like future and past and present and stuff like that. They thought about all of this stuff to really like when all these situations were to arise. It really felt like everybody in the future like could count down exactly or recall exactly what had happened in Sarah Connor or John Connor's life, and like really narrowed it down what it exactly per day to day of their life that they needed in situations. It was kind of just like, okay, all right, sure. Yeah, because ultimately you'd have like, it seemed like they would like, yeah, we really want to put this in the show, but now we have to kind of come up with a reason for why we want this in the show. And a lot of times it's just kind of a visually interesting thing that they have to add in there or here or there to just kind of go like, yeah, we're gonna try to, as much as possible, try to bring up some stuff from the movie. But then again, we're not gonna like there's not an overly, like, at some points there's not like an overly good uh like story overall, like overall going for episode to episode to episode. A lot of times uh they just kind of ride like a lot of things a lot. They kind of like ride a lot of waves going on within this show. There's a lot of times where it's like, oh yeah, hey, we're really gonna showcase Sarah in a wave, and then, oh hey, we're gonna really showcase Cameron in a giant wave, and then, oh okay, now we have this character coming in. Now we're gonna have him be an entire key to this story, and then John is gonna like do this thing and this thing here, but then he's just kind of a guy that's just standing around and is like a just honestly just like, I guess is like, well, I guess he's just a character that does much more in the other movies, and so I guess we just have to go, well yeah, he just took between year in his teen years, he really just was like a big humping log where he just sat around and did nothing. Like, you would think that this guy would, like, I think they could have wrote in this show the reason why this guy or this actor was not used at all is because he was training. Like, Sarah Connor goes in the show and she's like, yeah, I guess I should really train my son. And like, then like Cameron has to come in and say, he's like, oh yeah, you did train your son really well because he said that you were like the best trainer that he ever trained by, and like you were the best around, no one's gonna ever keep you down, and this and that. And it's like, and I was like, so this person mentions that they're doing basically nothing for their kid, and but then like they have to justify, it's like, well yeah, you're not a bad parent, you're the best parent ever, but you're just not doing anything with your son. But we're not gonna try to like we're gonna try to like I don't know, they like try to justify some lacking things that they were doing, but then try to cement that, oh no, 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 you're doing the right thing. It's like uh, this guy could have been training the entire time. He could have been like Batman Begins, or he could have been like Bruce Wayne Gotham the entire time. He could have been like doing all these bizarre training that like when he was young it doesn't quite make sense. But then he's like, but then they ultimately say it's like, well, yeah, years down the line you'll understand this. You'll get why we did all of this. But instead he's just, hey, yeah, I'm John Connor. I'm the Resistance. Woo! I'm standing around here. I'm not saying any lines, so I guess I shouldn't say this or this or this, but I'm here. Wow. Because you could say it's like, well, but yeah, Sarah Connor is a screen. Sarah Connor, she's not used. She's not used to that degree. Honestly, you could kind of debate that. Yeah, she is at some portions of episodes. Reasonably, this show really does. Um, this show, this show kind of just does just enough to be a an overall like good show. There's a lot of odd choices. There's a lot of times where I felt like, man, were they really writing this show per week to week to week? They weren't looking at this show as a overall somebody's gonna buy the first season of this. Somebody was gonna like watch this entire season in one go. Like I don't think it works as a binge watching show. Like I think it works as a weekly episodic television thing. I don't think it works as a binge watching thing. But I don't know how the second season is. Maybe in the second season they had a lot more money because more than likely they were just kind of like um, unsure whether or not to keep this show alive or not. Uh, but it seems like they like people loved the show. People enjoyed the show. So I don't know. That's all I want to talk about this show in a very cryptic like sense because I don't want to take way too much time into going into it in a very cryptic like sense because I don't want to spend like 20 minutes talking about it in cryptic like sense and then probably spend another, who knows, 20 minutes talking about it and maybe spoiler terms or maybe less than that. I don't know. So let's go into spoiler variation of the show. If like ultimately, I'm kind of like on the fence, mentioning if it's a good or bad show. Ultimately, I think it's better than what I expected. So I think that could be an overall sense of where like it's a good show because it was better than I expected. It was a good show because it's uh, kind of there's interesting fight scenes than I thought there would be. And yeah, so it's a positive show. I guess it's just a little bit better than I would say it's probably a good show. It's a solid good show. It's a solidly good show. I wouldn't say that there's some clunky things. There's some clunky like there's a bizarre intro sound that I thought was just bizarre in the intro of this show. Like there's this bizarre like fizzle fizzle sound where you have it where the Terminator is popping in his eyes, and there's this bizarre like fizzle 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 fizzle, like sound, and I'm like, that does not make sense. It sounds like the Ghostbusters blasters from the Ghostbuster films, like the it's like it should have been like more like it should be like a drill going into like somebody's eye, or somebody's eye. It should be a drill going into inserting into something. It should not be a weird, bizarrish like Ghostbusters blaster sound inserting someone's eye that made no freaking sense to me. But I think Like, there's a lot of cosmetic issues about this show. There's some kind of clothes that kind of feel cheap at some points. Like, it felt like a thrift store buy. Um, there's some stuff that I just kind of was like, man, like, this show, at some points, you could fight to say it was a cheaply done show, but at least they had a lot of effects going onto this thing. Um, yeah, there's kind of a back and forth in my mind about kind of if this show felt cheap or not. Uh, so let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this show. Recently, I guess you can kind of get my consensus that like this isn't a bad show. It's not like it's kind of better than what I expected. It kind of ties into the T2 story. So ultimately, if you watch Terminator Judgment Day, and those are the only two Terminator movies you've ever seen in your life, like it does have a tying into those kind of movies, the very first two movies. So if you ultimately want to watch the very first two Terminator movies and then watch this show, go ahead, because it feels like that kind of thing. So we ultimately have John Connor going into school because he's got to get his education, because ultimately he just can't be a kid that just stands around in his home just going, yeah, I'm John Connor. I'm John Connor, lead the resistance, everybody. I'm here, but I don't do jack crap, nothing. So we ultimately have it to where John Connor is just like any young kid who is looking at a woman that says hello to him, and he's like, "Oh, interesting. Yeah, hey, yeah, cool, ooh, yeah." Like, and so we ultimately have John Connor going to school, and ultimately his teacher is doing an attendance. It's like, oh wow, teacher doing an attendance, but his hair looks kind of weird. Because I might skip the whole. We might have to like regurgitate back to like a dream sequence that happened before this. But if you've seen the show, you know that dream sequence. Come on, it's not like we haven't seen a dream sequence before in a Terminator movie. But anyways, so we ultimately have John Connor taking attendance, and ultimately the teacher has this like really odd looking hair where I'm just kind of like, is this who I think it is? Is this a Terminator? I'm like, because this guy, like, he doesn't have the like all the other Terminator does. But man, like, his hair just, like, sticks out. And surefire enough, this Terminator gets to John Reese, this teacher, not Terminator, teacher Terminator. John Reese is like, yeah, I'm John Reese. And then freaking the guy, like, stabs himself in the leg and pulls out this gun and shows off his robotic leg and freaking just pow, pow, pow. God, a lot of the freaking sounds in this show were so freaking loud. Like, man, do they really want to showcase that, like, these bullets were loud? Like, even to where, like, people, when they had to, like, eat something, man, were like the crunches, you could really hear those crunches. Nothing about this show, like, you had to have like a hearing sense of what's going on in the show. It was so weird. Like, they were trying to like give you some kind of like sense of hearing. Like, you had to, if you were gonna know a Terminator was coming, you had to hear him coming, where he's like, you had to hear him coming. It was weird. And you had to freaking, like, when people were eating, you had to hear them crunch. You had to hear them crunch. It's freaking weird in the show. But ultimately, when you have freaking gunfire, it's like, boom, boom. It's like getting freaking, like, a cannon being shot out. It was weird. Like, every shot was like, man, this sounds like battle. This sounds like a freaking like cannon being shot out. Like that's how like hard hitting the freaking like guns were in this show. It's so weird. But anyway, so we have it to where freaking John Connor is in school and he's being chased out of his classroom. Like he freaking just jumps right out of a freaking window. And I'm like, how is it that this window can easily break and this kid flies out of this window and the teacher's chasing after him and ultimately just poo, 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 firing out of his gun. And we have it to where it feels like John Connor is going to get shot, really showcasing that this, like, we're going to have to deal with an alternative timeline where John Connor gets shot right away, and then Sarah Connor is just an existing thing. Kind of like how seemingly the other, like, Terminator movies were, where it's like, oh, hey guys, let's just showcase Sarah Connor. Like, she's the only thing that is left in our lives. And like if John Connor wasn't basically ending up in one of the other Terminator films as basically the last hope for Skynet, spoilers for anybody who would watch any of the other Terminator movies, or spoilers for anybody who doesn't know where John Connor ends up at the end of this whole thing. Uh, Probably a non-existent entity for really past Rise of the Machine, like really kind of past that. It's like they're kind of looking way past John Connor and looking for some other trophy to just kind of like go, well, yeah, John Connor's not really the cool hot thing anymore. Now it needs to be somebody else. And I just thought that was severely goofy to me, honestly. But anyways, freaking so teacher shooting down John Connor, and then we have like in a very Twilight like way, we have a freaking car ramming this Terminator, and then we have the freaking truck door open, and we have the girl that says, "Come with me if you want to live," and I'm like, okay, so she's the Terminator. She was shot in the freaking she was shot in the class, but I'm like, well, yeah, she didn't get killed right away. I'm sure she's probably an actual Terminator because anybody who's ever seen any trailer of the show would know that this person is a Terminator because they know the show. So she does the line, "Come with me if you want to live," and they get whisked away to eventually be a tying force with one another. And Cameron has to eventually seek out Sarah Connor, and they have to kind of evade this teacher that is consistently coming at them through this first pilot episode. And I was like, yeah, like freaking we have this Terminator that consistently gets deformed through this entire thing. There's several kinds of just like all kinds of just like real like damage of this Terminator. I'm like, man, this is like really winning me over on the whole, like them really taking the time to put all these kind of goofy effects on these Terminator characters when they're really damaged and stuff like that. Like that's good on that. Good for them to really put forth a real effort to really make these Terminators like distorted and this and that. Doesn't really seem like Summer gets that kind of treatment a lot because she, like, if anything, like, it's kind of funny. I think, like, is she the more upgraded model or is she basically equal, if not the same? Because I'm just like, man, you would think that she would get just as banged up, but no, this is like Summer and freaking Cameron, and she's just like this like, oh no scrape on me, just like she kind of has some stuff here and there that slap a band-aid on and she's good. Like just like, yeah, I just got a little scuff here and there. Anyways, we get to before this moment happened, and we have to have that classic scene where Sarah Connor is trying to rescue her son, trying to like rip him out of school because because she thinks something's going down, and all of a sudden there's cops right up in front of the school just going, Sarah Connor, you're coming with us, and we're going to arrest your son as well. And really, right as that happens, like as all the cops are arresting the Sarah Connor's son, they have it to where a Terminator shows up and freaking decks all these cops. And this is like before in a dream sequence and all this stuff, so it doesn't really matter, but I'm mentioning that anyways because it's kind of cool once you get to a certain point of this show. Like at first it kind of feels very cheap, but then you get to the big huge like wha-boom, because ultimately you have this Terminator that supposedly shoots John Connor, but it's okay folks, it's okay, it's just a dream. And and then like Sarah Connor runs to her son. She's like, John, because we ultimately have to cement that John Connor is just gonna be dead the entire show, anyways. He's gonna be dead to us the entire show, anyways. That's what's kind of we're putting as a front to this show is like John is gonna be a non-existent entity in this show, so he has to be like dead in all of our minds right away. So John gets shot. Sarah runs to her, comforts her dead son, bizarrely. And then she has to mention that if John's dead, then the Terminator might as well shoot her. And that's basically when the Terminator just bizarrely, there's bombs all of a sudden dropping, and then he turns into his Terminator skin, and then intro to show, and like, this was all a dream, and just like, okay, dokie, wow, this is kind of a very like odd way to start a show off. But then, anyways, we go back, and we just eventually have within this show, because I want to kind of really quickly go through some of the show, and I want to like bring up the entire episode. Anyways, so again, Summer freaking beats up guys twice her size through a bulk of this time. So and that's probably the most exciting part. Pretty much the reason why she freaking should be the main seller of this whole entire show, because nobody else is. So, anyways, we get into this show, and we have it to where reasonably we have several times where Sarah and Connor have to change their identities, try to get fake IDs, all this other like back around people that Sarah knows, be it either Mexico or something along those lines, to ultimately try to get fake IDs, and all the while telling her son that you can never be safe, and like kind of like don't trust anybody, and all these other kind of one-liners that she can throw at her son, that her son like already knew that she said 100 times already. And ultimately we blend into eventually there being some FBI agent that is consistently seeming to be after them, and like he's coming to realize that yeah, these Terminator things, like it seems like more and more there's got to be some truth to what this girl says, and there's got to be some rational things that are going on here. The more he keeps approaching these things, it seems like, why are these people doing so much work for something that like sounds crazy? But then again, this guy eventually gets into the season or part of the season where there's somebody actually convincing him about this stuff, because tying into older movie to this show, yeah. So we have it to where ultimately Cameron is consistently beating up people, and that is all fun and good. We have a lot of Terminators that have to get so freaking beaten up that they have to get replacement living tissue on their bodies. So they have to go and drop themselves into a bathtub of liquids to be able to re-put on their skin, which I thought was so bizarre. While you have this guy that is putting this uh, this mixture together in this tub. Like, it is so bizarre that this guy is just in awe of this Terminator, and it seems like he's doing everything that he wants at will, and it's so freaking weird. Like, and like, I guess this guy immediately assumes that he's going to be able to live after all of this and have this formula to be able to make living tissue over endoskeleton or whatever it ends up being called. There are throwbacks to a lot of the lines of which that they kind of do later on in the show. Remembering the line of Kyle Reese, where like his big line in the first movie, um, they have to go through that entire rigmarole again of mentioning that entire line word for word, because sometimes there is very much filler in this show. Because there's a lot of times where it's like, hey, yeah, remember what Kyle Reese said in the Terminator movie, where it doesn't feel pity or remorse and it absolutely will not stop? Yeah, we gotta go through that again. Luckily, they never say I will be back in this show whatsoever. Maybe in the second season they throw that out there, but they don't say that in this show whatsoever. All in this first season, which I was like, good for that. But they throw a lot of other stuff in there. Like the fate is what we make, or whatever that freaking line was, whatever they want to retcon or change it to just be like, because it seemed like through a lot of the movies they kind of changed that line and retconned it and changed it to just be something different, like the fate is what we make for ourselves, or whatever the f thing that they would say through time of like, are we fated? We're fated. We're Terminator fated. We're like fate and this and that and whatever. Eventually, we get into this show where Terminators just keep on coming. They either come in to be disguised as otherwise kind of FBI agents, or they come in as um, just kind of random people that just appear out of nowhere and all of a sudden just start beating Summer up or Cameron up. All while eventually we have these just kind of pieces that are just floating around of some Terminators here and there. There's sometimes where there's like a whole skull that's just been found by some homeless person, or there's some hand that's found by some therapist at one point, or this and that, and just like all kinds of body parts just fallen just all over the place. How anyway, so we get to the point of there being this whole huge reference and crossover of remembering the Terminator, the T2 movie. And recently I was just like, okay, so they're actually going to mention it. They're actually going to mention pre-existing things. But then again, they kind of they put kind of people at certain kind of different age ranges to make it seem like, oh, hey, here's a teenage Kyle Reese, or hey, here's a really, really young Kyle Reese. So if anything, if any of the Terminators did a Kyle Reese at a certain age range, well, hey, here's our Kyle Reese, and this and that. And I was just kind of like, ugh. Like, man, like, you should have just don't try and conveniently put a Kyle Reese at a certain age. Just come on, just do it to where, like, just cementingly go, hey, this is just our Kyle Reese, like you did with Sarah Connor or John Connor. Just cement that it's like, no, this is just going to be our Kyle Reese. Who cares who played him before or in between, or who they changed to make him look like Kyle Reese, some other freaking movie, whatever. No. Just say, hey, this is our Kyle Reese, deal with it, or maybe like there was some kind of stuff where it's like, oh yeah, we'll give you all these certain characters, but don't do anything with this character till we say so, and this and that. Don't do much with Kyle because we blah, blah, blah. But you can do something with Kyle's like brother. Like do something with his brother. So they had to reinvent some Reese to be added into this story. And man, did this character have a ton of mileage during the second portion of this season. Man, did they really use this character a lot. And I just thought, I was like, man, is this show like. Are we even going to make this show even about Sarah Connor? We're just really riding the wavelength off of this Cameron character, and then shortly thereafter that, like it's a whole story about about John Connor's uncle, and his story, and I was just like, man, like where is the Sarah Connor story coming in? But recently there is like a little bit of flashbacking of Terminator 2. We have it to where there's therapy sessions that Sarah Connor is in, showcasing a little bit of her past. But ultimately, you have a very vastly different therapist that they just shoved in there that looks nothing like the guy from the movie, because everything just has to be just like, again, I like that they cementedly just say, F it, this is just going to be our therapist for this show. We don't care what he looked like in the movie. But I wish they would have just kept going along with that. They would have just kept going like, hey, this is our freaking Kyle Reese. This is our this character. This is our this. Suck it. Like, if you don't like it, suck it. We don't care. Like, it is what it is. Like, I wish that they would have just firmly just went and did that. It's like, well, if you don't like our version, there's 17 other movies that are probably going to come out with all of these other Terminator things. So if you don't like our thing, then F it. There's going to be some other things. Anyways, there's a lot of times that I thought that this show was really smart. That whole bank vault thing where we have a Terminator coming at them in the bank vault while they had it to where they had the time traveling device in the bank vault. I was like, wow, this is actually like really smart. Like, bizarrely, I thought there was a lot of times where they just kind of conveniently wanted to do cool stuff, and like that whole bank vault thing was really just like, we want to do a lot of really cool stuff in this episode, all combined together. And like, I think that was trying to really push people over the edge to go and watch this show if they didn't. Because they were really pushing as much as possible to do a lot of cool stuff in one jam-packed episode. And reasonably, I think everything that kind of happened after that or in between that kind of was like, at some points, like very small points, just kind of limping on, like just waiting for that moment to come. And like, ooh, wow, cool, here's a whole lot of cool stuff going on simultaneously. And then kind of like after that, it was just kind of like, okay, let's try to do some future stuff. Where I was just like, ew. It's like a little cringe on that future stuff. But hey, whatever. Like trying to, like, they had to do a whole lot of like goofy-esh like things where, like, hey, in the future, this part of this wall is already like exploded, so we have to explode it now. I'm like, wow, really? Okay. But anyways, we get down to where it seems like Cameron can almost be, we're not exactly 100% sure if she could always be trusted. Like, for Arnold's character, we easily knew that. But there are some times where it seems like Cameron is kind of hiding some things. She's very mysterious. She's kind of mischievous. And it seems like at any point she could turn on us. turn on the characters, and we'd just be like, "Whoa, Cameron, she's turning." Like it's not like we couldn't see her eventual turn to go to the dark side, but I think she is also having some self preservations because she probably realizes that if Skynet gets like taken down in the past, she doesn't exist. Or you can ultimately break it down as like Arnold would say that ultimately like if Sarah were to die in the past, like Arnold would just keep going on living an unfulfilled life or whatever, because ultimately it's just like, yeah, he would just be limping on and just like uh, being a character that just exists in the world that uh, a future thing doesn't exist for him. Like Judgment Day doesn't exist, but they've kind of firmly cemented that Judgment Day exists. It's inevitable. And they've kind of really pushed that thing to the limit of just ultimately going like, oh no, like it can be stopped. And like, or like, there's so many times now where we have to just kind of forcibly just go like it can't be stopped, it's going to be inevitable, but they have so many times where they have to like do this like prerequisite before Judgment Day happens, that like we have Sarah Connor again or John Connor again in the past, and it's just like that's just because they don't want to do like Terminator Salvation, where they like do a future movie where they have to like put so much like future tech things going on in one entire film. They want to kind of just do that as like a smaller portion of the film, but they don't want to do that as an entire movie like they did Terminator Salvation. They don't want to do that again because heaven forbid you make a really cool futuristic Terminator movie for an entire film. Heaven forbid you do that. No, I just want to have cool Terminators show up in the past yet again, and that's just that's just how we roll. It's just how we do things. Um, yeah. So we have it to where Summer eventually takes a brain part out of one of these Terminators and just kind of holds it and puts it in her pocket and just kind of doesn't really tell anybody what her plans are for this. And ultimately, she doesn't actually use it until someone confronts her with it. And I'm like, what is this, like a plot device for them to just kind of use, like, have this in their back pocket to use this as an episode? That's kind of what it feels like. Is it just kind of like, oh yeah, well, she needs to hide that so that way if they have nothing going on in another episode, then they can like use um this whole like peace thing as a, ooh yeah, we're gonna use this as a plot device to be able to fill out more episode. And that's what it kind of becomes. So I think there's a lot of times where they like take things to save it for later, which I think is so weird. They set up things eventually plopping down weirdly in this episode for it to have some kind of payout later on. Which I just kind of thought like, man, that's kind of a weird way to shoot a show. To just kind of have like things just laying around that eventually you're going to use at some point. Hopefully people remember what that thing was, and this and that. But that's kind of how the show was just written. It was weird. So going into this show, yeah, it was. We have it to where they tie in to the T2 movie, and they ultimately have it to where eventually you get to see John Connor in a just park, some kind of park. They go and him and his uncle go and eat ice cream together because supposedly it's his birthday, and he actually gets to be in the same like park-esh like place as his father. I guess coincidentally, Kyle Reese and John Connor were in the same state at the same time, and John could see his young father, and then get all weepy because he's like, "Oh, I get to see my dad," and yeah, it's like, and I get to have a little nice little thing of like, I rarely ever actually got to physically get to see my father, but this is like the closest thing to being able to see him in some kind of capacity. But you would think that like then really Kyle Reese's life would be somehow on the line. Like you would think that he would be like how in Terminator Salvation, like Kyle Reese was enemy number one. How is it that they didn't take him out like when he was a young child, just like John Connor? It kind of like it doesn't make sense to me how like they didn't factor that into like planning doing that, because they basically tried that with Sarah Connor. You would think that they would go after any number of combinations to divert or affect the momentum of John Connor being born in every single which factor. Going after Kyle Reese as a child, as a baby, as a whatever. Maybe going after Kyle Reese's parents, so that way Kyle Reese doesn't get born. They could have gone any number of routes to lock down every single iteration, so that way Kyle Reese does not become a thing in any way, form, or fashion. It would have been interesting if John Connor going, "Oh wow, hey look, it's my dad. Hey look, great, it's my dad." And then all of a sudden, like the Terminator, like starts walking up and dun dun dun, and then they have to like fight off this Terminator away from Kyle Reese, and that would have been kind of interesting. Just like, what the f is going on? Because ultimately that would have been a very weird like scene of like Kyle Reese getting his first like taste of ever seeing like a Terminator even before like Judgment Day actually happened. So he's been like, you could ultimately say that Kyle Reese had been technically fighting a Terminator in one way or another in their life. Um, because ultimately they kind of technically retconned it to having Kyle Reese being several different age ranges, and eventually John Connor finding him or something else, some kind of other thing where they kind of like, oh yeah, when Judgment Day happened, like Kyle Reese was just a little boy, and this and that is. But anyways, yeah, just kind of really rushing through trying to get this whole review done. Um, like the whole thing with the FBI agent coming to realization of, hey, maybe this Sarah Connor woman does have some real like, maybe she is really like being like, maybe she knows things about the future and this and that. Like this FBI agent is finally coming to the realization that there are Terminators around, and that ultimately he is going to be quickly and utterly like taken down by these things, and there's no fighting his future. And like it's interesting that he comes to this realization that he can't fight fate, and that Sarah Connor was right all along, and also so eventually does this paramedic. The paramedic that ends up being like tied to otherwise Sarah Connor, which we thought was just gonna be like, okay, well that was just gonna be some random dude that ends up just being with Sarah Connor, and then he's just gonna be like goodbye. No, he ends up getting tied throughout a bulk of this entire season, and kind of switches to really go out of his way to start believing in Sarah Connor and John Connor, and what they actually are saying makes sense. All the while, we get some ties to Miles Dyson's wife, who ultimately consistently gets driven into the story to ultimately kind of uh, try to tie up some loose ends that might have been tied to Miles Dyson. That could quite possibly turn into making some future Skynet robots. We bizarrely have some guy that otherwise just uh, figures out how to make a robot play chess, and they have to have a whole entire like journey of him being tied into this story. Um, Eventually, for him ultimately to just get shot by a Reese from the future, and a Uncle Reese, I guess you can call him, coming back to the past to shoot this guy in the head, to ultimately just have some confirmed tying that it's like, yeah, this guy like was in the future telling us that he created Skynet, and oh, what a mistake he made, and he was the devil. Um, because ultimately he fought with the freedom fighters from in the future, and he like mentioned how like much of a mistake he made by putting this whole thing together. So like Reese is going back into the back to the back to the past, and knocking off all the scientist people that could quite possibly put this Skynet thing together. um and he's ultimately mentioning that you cannot trust these Terminators. Like, he doesn't want anything to do with them. Whenever they get close to him, he's like, I don't want her here. Like, I can't sleep with her here. I can't trust her, and like this and that. And like, even when this Terminator is going out of her way to help him, he's like, I don't trust. I don't trust. So there's so much tying to this Reese guy. It's ridiculous. But yeah, that's overall all I wanted to talk about throughout this review. Mentioning about the first season. Again, there was a lot of mileage taking out of like kind of like having a story where you have one portion of something just to be kind of concluded later on, or you have one driving force of a couple episodes, and like a lot of times people could say that this season probably felt like a lot of filler. Like, it felt like a lot of just like, we really just got to get this thing done through a lot of it. But maybe the second season, since it's a lot longer, maybe it's better. Who knows? I heard a lot of people like this show, so ultimately, I don't know whether I want to invest in a very long second season. But I'm gonna get out of here because I've been almost talking for an hour, so I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.